Welcome to the Anxiety Relief Summit, where you will find holistic and practical solutions you can start taking today to break free from the worry spirals, regain your peace of mind, and confidence to take action on the things that matter most. Hi, I'm your summit host, Laura Leavitt, and the information provided in this summit is not a substitute for counseling or medical advice. The information presented here is meant to inspire and educate listeners, but are not guarantees of any kind. I'm so glad you're here, and let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to Anxiety Relief Summit. Today, we have a special presenter with us, Dr. Craig Weiner. Hello.
Hi, glad to be here, Laura.
Hey, it's a pleasure to have you. Let's tell our guests a little bit about you before we start to talk, okay? So Dr. Craig Weiner is an international trainer in EFT and matrix re-imprinting and trauma work. He travels and trains with his life partner and wife, Alina Frank, and they support practitioners and licensed healthcare practitioners to obtain their certification in EFT International. He currently serves as chair on the board of trustees for EFT International, and his private coaching specializes in helping individuals and practitioners to live an outrageous life. For some, that looks like more help. For others, better relationships, and for others, reaching greater success. Their business, the EFT Tapping Training Institute, provides opportunities for in-person and online programs, coaching, courses, and certified trainings. And they also host the EFT Nation podcast. So welcome, Craig.
Oh, thank you, Laura. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, I'm happy about it. And you are an expert with a wealth of information. Your website, I could get lost in there for days. So take us back a little bit and tell us what brought you to this healing field, serving people with these healing modalities. And did anxiety play a part in any of that, or do you just work with clients with anxiety?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I've been in the healthcare field for about 35 years. So I was a massage therapist. I've been a chiropractor for over 30 years, and personally been through lots of studying and exploring different healing modalities. EFT found about 15 years ago. And I've been a practitioner and trainer, and I train trainers, and so I do all of that in the EFT world. I wouldn't say that my personal anxiety is what helped me find EFT, but I would say that it's almost impossible to be working with EFT as a modality and not be working with people's anxiety, because what you start to understand is that people everywhere have different levels of experiences in their life and their past that set up patterns that make the future seem scary, that make situations or circumstances create varying levels of anxiousness up to the level of disabling clinical anxiety and everything in between. So I think one thing that everybody has in common is some understanding of a future-based fear or worry that can rise to the level of annoying anxiety to disabling anxiety. When I look to my past, I could look to times that I wouldn't have called anxiety, but that I felt anxious about. So I think that's really for everybody their own unique relationship with that future-based concern, which is really what anxiety is all about at the core. And when I first found EFT as a modality, I was very skeptical about it. I was hearing all these promises about how EFT could help everything, and how this tapping on your face can get rid of fear and anxieties and phobias and all that. And I kind of just threw it to the side as, yeah, maybe, not really, probably. And then I began to do some research, and I actually, through a variety of circumstances, started to take a deeper dive into it and said, wow, this is really something. And since that time, there's a ton of research that really supports EFT's effectiveness for various anxiety triggers and targets, etc. So so the longer I do this, the more I work with it, the more I see it work, and it's incredibly effective. It's not the only modality to use anxiety for, but it is a very effective one.
It's true. It does work fast, and brings down the anxiety quite quickly. There's tons of studies out on EFT and its effectiveness now. I think last I heard was like 168 clinical studies proving its effectiveness. So that's becoming way more mainstream. Lots more people are hearing about it, which is really good.
There is, and there's actually, one of the 3 most populated research categories of EFT's effectiveness is for anxiety. So anxiety, depression, and PTSD are the ones that have meta-analyses, which is like the kind of the grandpa of studies. In other words, it looks at studies of studies. And when we look at clinical trials, we see, as I was kind of pointing to the target of anxiety, we see studies with anxiety in nurses during COVID. We see anxiety in public speaking anxiety. We see anxiety for people with upcoming back surgery. We see anxiety with people that are suffering from PTSD. We see anxiety in K-8 young children and test exam and public speaking anxiety. And so, the source of anxiety is as varied as the individual, and there's really quite a breadth of studies that show EFT to show statistical significance in reducing anxiety quite effectively and quite quickly.
I feel like you've got to calm down that surface level anxiety to get to the deeper stuff. So that's why it's really good to start there, right?
Well, I think, we'll talk about, I hope, different ways of using EFT. And I would say most often we're dealing with what's present, right? In other words, when we're feeling from a little bit to a lot of anxiety, we're at that place where we can move toward being dysregulated. We can move toward that place where we're not thinking clearly. We can have obsessive thoughts. We can have physical sensations. We can have just that inability to think creatively, to be able to come up with solutions that are best in a situation, to be able to, have trouble resourcing ourselves, trouble being able to find that calm and that center place again. So we move away from the calm, we move away from a resource state when we're feeling anxiety. And we can't often see the through the forest, through the trees there, because the anxiety is so present that we don't come up with best solutions. Ones that we might even be able to easily reach if we weren't in that state. So when we're dealing with anxiety, most often the first level step is just learning how to neuroregulate and self-regulate ourselves to be able to then find, okay, what's my best next step given the situation? And once we do that, then if somebody is ready, it's like, okay, why is this getting to me so much? Why is this such a trigger for me? How do I resolve the underlying issues underneath that show up as anxiety in the moment as a strategy is kind of a deeper level work.
Yeah, so before we even go into the tapping, I did want to know a little bit about how stress, trauma, anxiety all fit together.
Yeah, well, they're different, but they overlap. So, stress, there are different kinds of stress and different levels of stress. In fact, we would go back to the work, we would talk about good stress, eustress, a stress that says, okay, Craig, you're going to be on camera now. You need to be like energized. And, there's a level of stress that's a helpful, healthy stress, excuse me, that mobilizes our energy and helps us get out of bed when we don't want to and helps us to complete a project that needs to get done. So stress isn't all bad. It's our response, especially the response to the circumstance. But there's a level at which stress can now start to be harmful. Right? There's a level at which maintaining stress levels, maintaining that adrenaline and that cortisol coursing through our body is keeping us in, for example, our sympathetic fight or flight nervous system for prolonged periods of time. And we have a hard time getting back to that home zone, back to that calm, regulated place. So that level of stress, we know over time, can really be harmful to not just our mental health, but our physical health as well. And, from all kinds of cardiovascular diseases and depleted immune function, et cetera. So stress good and bad, positives and negatives. It's mostly we're looking like, how do we adapt to the circumstance, have a best response, feel what we feel, overcome, resource ourselves, and return back to a baseline. The problem is we don't return to that baseline easily, or it takes a prolonged amount of time to get back there. Okay? And it's not that it's wrong. There's always a reason. That's our adaptive response to our circumstances. So we're doing the best we can. But often we had experiences in our life that causes our nervous system to stay at that level. So, you know, sometimes when the car is running and you turn on the gas and it's like, and it's working really hard. And sometimes like we just need to allow it to be able to go, right, and to bring that back down. So sometimes it feels like our nervous system is up here and we need to find ways and tools to bring it back down. When we get very stressed and emotionally stressed, you know, Dan Siegel has a great analogy. It's like, you know, you think about your brain and nervous system all working together, and it's kind of like we have the deep reptilian part of our brain and our midbrain and our cortical, more thinking brain. And when it's working and we're regulated, and we're in that calm, regulated place, everything's working together. Everything has access to connect and draw resources from different parts of the brain and nervous system. But when something triggers us and we flip our lid and we get anxious and stressed and we go here, pieces aren't connected anymore. And so now what's exposed is deeper survival parts of our brain and emotional parts of our brain. And so that we respond not inappropriately, but we respond in maybe an exaggerated way or a defensive way or a more reactive way. And so what we're looking at is when we're feeling stressed and anxious, what are the most effective ways we have to bring everything back online in an integrated fashion? So EFT can be really, really effective quite quickly in doing that. I see that all the time. And so every client I work with, I teach how to self-tap, especially when they start to feel out of sorts, especially when they start to feel anxious. And just even tapping on the points, and I know you have other guests that have been doing EFT and you yourself do that, and just being able to tap on the points. I teach them how to do it even just silently, to just tap on the points gently when they forget what they even need to say and what the words are for EFT, because when we're stressed, we forget things and we're not thinking clearly. So even just tapping on the points or having a favorite point that might be most effective to be able to tap on under the table when people are around. So silent tapping can help to reduce that stress level. In fact, you know, we have multiple studies showing that rather quickly and quite effectively, EFT can reduce the cortisol levels from anywhere from like 37 to 42% within an hour session. And I know that there's a quicker drop even quickly than that. So we can start to just self-tap to regulate ourselves and figure out, do I need to leave the situation? Do I need to be quiet? Do I need to say something? What do I need to do right now? And as the next step. So, you know, stress really varies, but when we have experienced trauma in our life, that's a whole different thing, right? Trauma, you know, one good definition from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association is that individual trauma results from some event, from some experience or a series of experiences or some set of circumstances that's experienced by somebody as either physically, emotionally harmful or life-threatening. And it has these lasting adverse effects on somebody's functioning and on their mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So trauma is very different than stress. When we experience a traumatic event, our nervous system and our mind, body goes into a very different gear. And that gear is about survival, right? And that gear that it goes into is recorded. Information is recorded very differently. It wires the nervous system very differently, especially when our nervous systems are still developing and when we're young. And so these traumatic events can have absolutely see it all the time, lifelong repercussions. And it's as if they are wiring the nervous system, especially when we're children, at a much higher level. I sometimes think of it as a car alarm. You know, if you have a car alarm, it should be set at a certain sensitivity that if somebody's trying to break in, the alarm goes off. But if you simply brush by it with your sleeve, the alarm shouldn't go off. But for many of us that have experienced traumatic events, it does, right? It's the way somebody looks at me. It was the certain feel of the situation, or the number of people in a situation, or any number of circumstances. It's getting dark out and I'm outside in a certain place, or there's a certain tone of voice that somebody uses, or a certain volume of voice, or the threat of a confrontation, any number of kinds of triggers that can set off an anxiety reaction that, a colleague of mine, Monica, says, when somebody comes in as a client and they have what their current issue or complaint or challenges, it's very real and very present for them. But if it's a real strong reaction, the thing ain't never the thing. It's, it's showing up as a current rendition and current manifestation of a problem that's probably been there much longer, that the seeds were sown much earlier in their life. And this is how it's showing up in my life currently. So if all of a sudden somebody looks at me wrong and I want to punch them in the nose, it's not really about that person. I was working with somebody recently, and it was like, I hate this person, and I know that I don't want to do that, but I just do. And I mean, and it ended up being, of course, not about that person, but that person was demonstrating a behavior that was actually something that they don't like and wish that they didn't do themselves. So in other words, that's the deeper work, though, is looking when somebody's ready to look at the source of their anxiety. It's a woven tapestry of past experiences that have often begun with traumatic origins.
Right, and that person who's got that kind of trauma might be, holding it all in and not really experiencing trauma, but I mean anxiety. But I find it interesting too that some people with anxiety, you can physically witness it. They're all over the place. They're busy. They're doing 10 things at once. They're, like they've had a lot of caffeine. But other people can be holding their anxiety within and not really expressing it. People can't
can show up. It's as individual as the person. That one person's anxiety is very internal and felt experientially in their body in many different ways, whether, how it affects their GI system, or their breath and their breathing, or their it's a chiropractor, the tension in the body that they're holding. And, anxiety is a part of anything that, as we're walking around in life, and there are things from our past that, for any number of reasons, make us fearful about something happening in the future, causes anxiety and anxiousness about that upcoming event. And that's whether you have an addiction, that's whether you have a phobia, that's whether you have a history of fear of confrontation or being judged or being disrespected, or all those things, and opportunities are coming up that are going to present that concern or that fear or that worry to show up, creates a level of anxiety in us. And sometimes it's a subtle buzz, and sometimes it's a lot more than that, as you were saying. And we all adapt. We all adapt and find ways to get through it, but they're not always healthy ways, because sometimes we find ways to take down that anxiety level. Could be in substance use, could be in different avoidance tendencies. So we just avoid situations that makes us feel anxious, but that's not necessarily healthy when being in a relationship. And on deep levels, often it goes an unspoken fear of like somebody finding out about us. The deeper fears of like, if I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough, or they'll find out I can't be trusted, or they'll find out that I da-da-da. And so often underlying the more seen anxieties are deeper level concerns and fears that are often beliefs about oneself or about the world, and often have to do with a feeling of safety or lack of safety.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that the conversation around, mental health and anxiety and how people are doing is really opening up. And this is really good, because that's a start for people to reach out for help, for, acknowledging it so that they can take that next step. So talk to us a little bit from your expert opinion here about when it's good to do find self-help tools like we're offering a lot of in the summit here, and when it's good to seek out additional help?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's always good to have self-help tools, right? So we don't do enough of that. I don't think, in our trauma classes, we teach a lot about helping clients to become more aware of their own resources. And when I say that, I mean, what are things that ground me? What are things that calm me? What are things that nurture me? People, places, activities. For some it's gratitude practices, for others it's meditation. But those same things can be stressful for somebody else, right? So, meditation is calming for one person and it'll drive somebody else crazy. Somebody else walking in the woods is the life-giving, and the other person, all it is like fears of what's going to pop out and the bugs that are going to. So no activity is a resource for everybody. And so I'm always encouraging people becoming more aware and participating more in their self-regulating resources. So that's really important, especially when they're doing healing work like EFT.
Yeah, just start somewhere and get familiar with a few things and then add a few more in.
Yep, and add one at a time.
Yeah.
All right. I want to say that the ability to learn EFT to help oneself is something for everybody. Okay, because at any moment in any course of the day, that if I can interrupt that that anxiety or even up to panic-driven fear that's going on, then I can calm myself and make a better choice in the moment. Okay, and it doesn't just continue the pattern. So the ability to break that pattern, and whether it's stepping aside, whether it's tapping silently, whether it's learning how to use like the basic, even though I feel anxious about, and the basic EFT sequence, that's really, really helpful. What I would say my concern is when somebody should use a practitioner is I'm not an advocate of somebody tapping on their own past traumatic experiences and their past severe adversity. So the time that, I was bullied and hit, the time when I was, there was abuse, the time when there was assault, the time when, I got hit by a car, the time when, I was in the fire, those kinds of significant traumas. What do I want to say? They shape us in many ways. They impact us in many ways. But to be able to move forward from a trauma, we often kind of push them down and file them away and put them under a lock and key. They still tend to come out, but they have a powerful effect, but they seem really distant. But when we start to, the thing about EFT is it really tunes you in. And so when we start, the beauty of EFT is how quickly and deeply it can tune us into things so that things can be there for healing. The challenge of EFT is how deeply and quickly things go as well. So what I say is, if I'm starting to revisit and think about those significant adverse events that happened in my life, it's kind of like falling off a life raft in a stormy sea and splashing around in the ocean. I need somebody to hold that life raft still for me. I need somebody to co-regulate with. And a trained practitioner in whatever technique, and we're talking about EFT right now, can hold that safe space for me to start to climb back into the boat and be able to get my breath back and stop choking and and get back to a regulated place. So working with a trauma-informed certified EFT practitioner is really, for certain conditions, that it should be a mental health care practitioner. I'm not advocating. So you can be an EFT practitioner and be a licensed mental health care and be a not licensed mental health care. I don't recommend, somebody that's, has severe PTSD or bipolar or schizophrenia or a lot of mental health diagnoses. You should be seeing a licensed mental health care provider. But most situations of anxiety, any certified EFT, and especially if they're trauma-informed practitioner, can help with that, to really hold the practices and trauma-informed practices, because EFT isn't just one technique. And maybe you came here and you heard about EFT, you saw something on YouTube, and of course anybody in the world can create an EFT YouTube. They don't even have to be certified or barely trained. Somebody taught them and they have a YouTube channel. So I just want to say to use wisdom and cautiousness with what's out there, because there's clinical EFT out there, and there are good practices and not so good practices. Why I'm so involved with EFT International, because we have a very high standard for what it takes to become certified and accredited and have trauma-informed practices. So that's important. So that's the distinction I would make, is that not work on your own trauma and work with somebody trained to do that. And when EFT doesn't work on yourself, you may then want to reach out to somebody that's trained as well, because sometimes things can be pretty overwhelming. You know, I might just be tapping on my current anxiety of the day, but there's really a lot deeper levels that my psyche's turning into. And it's tuning into my childhood. It's tuning into how it felt when I was embarrassed when this happened, and when I was, you know, ashamed when that happened. And all of a sudden, today's current anxieties starts tapping into something much, much bigger, or more global, as we'd say. And now all of a sudden, I'm crying and there's tears, and I'm having, you know, I'm starting to get lost in the fog here. So if ever EFT doesn't seem to be working, it's probably just because it needs to be applied in a different way than you're using it. And that's when I'd seek out some assistance.
Yeah, so it's a perfect place to get started, and taking it deeper and getting extra help when you're ready for that. For sure. So,
you know, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No.
Yeah. What other things have you found in your toolkit of things that have really helped for handling anxiety?
Yeah. What I want to say is, for some, you know, there are breath practices, there are grounding practices, there are gratitude practices, there's stillness practices, there's nature practice. So I just want to really be clear that there are many different tools and practices available, and, you know, hopefully people will be learning and garnering access to many of those on the summit here, which is really why you're doing what you're doing, so people can find these tools feel right for me. I tend to look at the deeper work. It's just my nature to work with people to find out, okay, that's what's happening now, but what's underneath that that's causing that to show up in this, that exaggerated response to show up in the circumstance. EFT is a variety of techniques, but another one that I'm very involved with and a trainer for is something called matrix reimprinting, EFT. And that's a really beautiful tool that works deeply, especially with childhood adversity and old memories, in which, you know, it's those significant events that happen in our life during which we make decisions about ourselves and our life. You know, often referred to as negative or limiting beliefs, but, you know, the decisions that the world isn't safe, the decisions that you can't trust men, the decisions that I'll never be smart enough, the decisions that I'll never find, you know, I don't deserve to be loved. All those kinds of like big decisions that determine the choices we make in life often come from those early traumatic experiences. And so matrix reimprinting works really beautifully. It's kind of like a form of inner child work. It kind of combines inner child work and family systems work with kind of a bit of hypnosis. It's this blend of approaches that helps me to visit with my younger self in a very dynamic way, to give that part of me the resources that I didn't have at that time, because I was young, for example, and didn't know better. I didn't know the circumstances. I didn't understand things, and was more easily overwhelmed because I didn't have as many resources back then. And so it's this level of almost a hypnagogic, hypnotic kind of state that gets created, where I then communicate with and resource and be able to advocate for that part of me that wasn't able to be successful in those experiences where something bad happened. And so then that part of me that has, in a sense, kind of separated off from me and continues to live in my life, that feels like, you know, I've just met so many, for example, highly, highly educated professionals that still what drives them is the feeling of they're still not smart enough, despite how many degrees they have, or, you know, a person that physically is of a certain way, but they never feel like they're going to be pretty enough or whatever enough. And yet everybody else looks at them and say, but you are, but they don't feel that way. And there's a reason they don't feel that way, because of a decision of somebody, something that happened to them, somebody that said something at an impressionable time that really became part of their hard wiring. And so when we do matrix reimprinting, we work with those inner younger parts, and provide them the support that they didn't get. And it really shows up very different when you come out of that situation. It's not about trying to like oneself and trying to accept oneself. It's like, I just do, and the idea that I know better, but knowledge is not enough. We have to feel different. And so we have to kind of rewire our response and rewire how we feel about ourselves, because it's all an inner game, right?
Yeah. So when you go back in and heal that past event and that past age period where, it's hard to understand things when you're 4. And so you're reshaping that, and it's changing how you're living and feeling and sensing in the present.
It is. And when we change our relationship to, I mean, that's the thing, for example, that really got me when I first found out about EFT. It's like, how can EFT help phobias and anxiety and physical pain and this and that and that? It's because all of it causes a stress response within me, whether it's the relationship or the job or the food or the phobic whatever or the situation. It's my stress response that causes offers the opportunity that if I can change my response to that thing, then I can be in its presence and be fine. I don't have to like it, but I can be neutral about it. And so, I see all the time with people that have anxiety around situations and different people. There was this client that felt tremendous anxiety around bald men. Okay. Never understood it, but wouldn't even go in certain, a coffee house here or different situations in which there were bald men. And, with EFT, worked the level of anxiety down about it and the fear about it and just the feelings about it. But it wasn't until a matrix re-imprinting session deeper on that they found out that when they were young and they were playing doctor with a friend, and mom came in and started screaming and said, "You can never come in the house again. You can never visit my son." All of that happened. While all of that was happening, she was looking straight ahead, and on the bookshelf was a model of Bozo the Clown with the bald head. Never made the connection at all, but given the intensity of that situation, something got wired in that said, this situation or anything that feels like, sounds like, looks like this situation or anything connected to it became a source of anxiety for them. So we don't always know the sources of anxiety. And it's not till we revisit, that younger part of ourselves that's experiencing that or visiting it, when done safely, that we find out that's why. And with that, often healing can happen. And that's where, I always look to, what is that post-traumatic growth? What is that expansion that is possible once we heal those parts of ourselves? And somebody's feeling safe and ready and in the right circumstances to do that.
Yes. I had an experience like that working with a trained professional EFT person. And once we started tapping on the surface stuff, like you said, you start with the surface stuff. And then what happened was some other things bubbled up once we got some surface stuff cleared that I didn't even remember from when I was young. And once it just bubbled up, it was like pop in my brain. And I'm like, hey, that must be the original source of this issue. And once we cleared that, oh, it was wonderful. So I know what you're talking about with, getting to that root cause. It can be a little bit of a mystery, but tapping kind of helps us peel the layers. And when it's ready, it's going to come up.
I find clients, they're often amazed. It's like, that's it? That's the source of all my anxiety, that.
For years.
Right, for years and decades, right? And then, but it's amazing because when we're young, things are incredibly impactful, right? And as an adult, we look at it like, oh, that was nothing. But through the eyes of the one experiencing it, it's like, whatever the decision is made about me not being enough in the world or the world being a certain way, etc. And then I look through those glasses, everything looks that way. So when I'm not looking through that lens anymore, people don't look so mean. Situations don't feel so scary. It's not like you're even trying to do it consciously. It just doesn't cause that same physical response. And very often it's the physical response that causes, when I start to feel my stomach tighten, I feel anxious. So when I start to feel my heartbeat, so sometimes it's an interoceptive trigger, in other words, how my body feels. There's a great body of work by Stephen Porges and Deb Dana, I won't get into it, in polyvagal theory work. But when we start to look at everything through a trauma-informed lens, we start, and that really everything is about feeling safe and feeling safe in my body, that when I'm not able to feel calm and interactive and socially connected to other people, then I start to move into that fight or flight response, like it might not be unsafe. And if that doesn't work, then I start to move into a whole nother shutdown state. So these states and the proclivity to live in these different nervous system wiring states is impacted by how my nervous system learned from the situation when I was a child. And it's not about blame, right? It's not about blaming anybody, but it is about acknowledging this is the way my nervous system was wired, and I'm going to have to acknowledge that and find a way to reteach it, to reteach that survival adaptive response to how my body had to adapt to what it lived through and what it experienced and how it experienced that. So there's no blame, there's no wrong. Our bodies are always doing the best it can, but it could use some, software updates sometimes, just like our computers do, right?
Yeah. And with the tapping, you can reframe and reset that trigger to being calm and pleasant and not frightening, not life or death.
Yep. It expands our window of tolerance so that in a great, sometimes, unfortunately, for many people, because of different experiences and things that they've lived through, and generationally, societally, because of privilege or lack of privilege, because of so many different factors, financial factors, and broken families, and childhood adversity, so many different issues, we end up having lives that get smaller, or less and less circumstances in which I can really be just present. And so our tolerance level shrinks. So, for me, EFT expands our window of tolerance to be in a greater and greater variety of circumstances, and not just be neutral, but even thrive in those. So I kind of look at life tends to often make us live more like this. And so EFT, as it starts to heal, allows life and circumstances that we're willing to try and expose ourselves to and feel safer in, expand. And so that's kind of the transformative work of EFT in my mind.
Well, I'm definitely love EFT and really highly recommend it. And I know you do too. So we'll encourage our listeners to find out more about it and try it. And they're going to be hearing more about it in the summit, of course, besides from just you and me. So you have created an ebook for the listeners?
Yeah, so we'll have, so if people want, and wherever you're going to put it down there, there'll be a link to a free ebook that they're welcome to get for self-applying EFT for a variety of circumstances. So kind of a beginning manual for using EFT on your own. If you're a practitioner of any sorts, any kind of health practitioner or coach, and you're interested in taking further training to be able to use it with yourself and others, then the website's EFTtappingtraining.com. And also give you a link. We have several thousand people in an EFT community in which people can be asking questions and watching videos and just a variety of resources. So I'll give you a link for that. And we've got YouTube channels and all kinds of stuff. But we want to provide lots of opportunities for people to start to learn how to tap themselves. And sometimes it changes their life enough to want to help others with it as well. So.
Well, then you're the resource to go to for that training. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Craig. That was a wealth of information. I enjoyed talking with you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for today. That was fun. And thank you for putting on the summit and being such a wonderful resource for so many people that are having to deal with living with anxiety, which is, I don't know, sometimes it's hard on partners, it's hard on the loved ones, but it's especially hard on the person that's living with that all the time, because it's just, it makes life not fun. And And there really is hope. I mean, that's the message I guess I want to say is I just see people that whose lives expand and whose anxiety, just drops, and all of a sudden their lives start expanding. So hopefully many people experience that as a result of the summit.
I think they will, and I think they'll be encouraged to look you up further and find out what you're offering. So thank you very much, Craig.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care and have a wonderful summer.
I will. You too.
All right. Bye-bye now.